Hey everybody, welcome to Family Church Podcast. This is our number seven podcast.
Can you imagine that?
And we haven't been kicked off of YouTube or Spotify or whatever else we're on. They've kept us on.
We own that.
Can't believe that. In fact, it's growing every week.
It is.
And we're excited about how God's using this podcast. Today, I'm joined as always with my co-host,
Felipe Mendes. I am your online pastor here at Family Church, but also co-host with Pastor Chuck and this podcast.
And this week, we're going to talk about one of the multis that we are at Family Church. We're multi-campus, we're multi-service, multi-generational, but we're also multicultural, and you won't want to miss this discussion. Hey, welcome back, everybody. I want to today introduce two of our pastors who are on staff with us. And first, let's start with Joel. Joel, tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Family Church.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Chuck. I am Joel Ramos, and I am the Spanish community lead pastor. Personally, I was a pastor's kid my entire life, served and helped my dad for a bunch of years, and when he retired, I kind of retired too at the ripe old age of about 25, and went into banking. And I did my banking years, and my academics was all in business. And but God had other plans. And when the time was perfect for him, then came over here to help out my church.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, you were already sitting in the pew.
I was already sitting in the pew for about 10 years.
Service, and I said, Joel, you're the man.
Yeah.
We're going to pay you practically nothing.
Big bucks,
work
big bucks.
80 hours a week. That's it. Just letting you know, pastors, that's how you started ministry. Right. We're also joined by Lécio Dornas. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Of course, I'm Pastor Lécio. I'm a lead pastor for Brazilian community here for 8 years. And I'm a pastor for 37 years and come from Brazil and live in the United States for 11 years. And I have the best time of my life here in the Family Church.
Awesome. And you're from Brazil. What part of Brazil?
In Rio de Janeiro State, and the city is Niterói. It's the great Rio area.
I have been to Rio.
Yeah.
I've been on Copacabana Beach.
Whoa.
I've seen stuff I cannot unsee.
Absolutely, Pastor.
And experienced some things I won't talk about on the podcast.
Yeah.
So, Felipe, you're from Brazil.
I am from Brazil.
Tell them what part of Brazil you're from.
I'm from Minas Gerais. It's the southeast. We're like neighbors of Rio de Janeiro as well, but we don't have access to the coast.
Yes.
And how long have you lived in the States?
In the States, 7 years.
7 years. Yeah. And you're a pastor's child, much like Joel.
Exactly. Yeah. I am. I grew up in a family. My father was a pastor. It is a pastor. Still a pastor of a church in Brazil. And I grew up in this environment where we learn on the really hard way how to do things in church. And you got to grow the church from nothing. So I had to learn several instruments to play bass, play drums, play guitar, sing, because the church, my father...
You were the worship team.
Yes. It's part of being a pastor's kid.
That's right.
But the thing is, as a church planter in Brazil, you will start the church in a little store with nothing, and you gotta invite the community around, and then as the church is already thriving, then the Baptist convention allocate my father to plant another church in another region. Yeah. So this is how we...
we had Azalea Santini on our staff, who is Brazilian. And so I've been to Brazil probably a half a dozen times.
Oh, great.
One of the times we were at a new church plant, and it was actually in an alley between two buildings that they put a roof over.
Yes.
And that was the church.
They
were in the alley, and it was growing and thriving, and you could feel the Spirit. It was exciting.
Amen.
Well, look, what I want us to do today is talk about what it means to be a multicultural, multi-ethnic church. We use those almost interchangeably. We know that there's different ethnicities, but even your ethnicity is defined by your culture.
That's right.
Yes.
Right? So a culture we would define is a certain set, it's an ethos, a set of values and principles that a group shares together. That's right. Sometimes it's a common language, other times it's a common culture. And as a church, even though we have 3 languages, we have multicultures,
That's
right? Because our East Winter Garden culture is different than the Windermere culture, which is different than the Oakland culture, which is different than the Brazilian culture,
Yes.
which is different than about 5 cultures in the Spanish culture.
That's right. That's right.
So, in fact, the Spanish represent, what are your main nations that represent in your Spanish
Yes,
congregation?
we are seeing such an incredibly exponential growth in our Latin community here in Horizons West, particularly this part of Florida. A couple years ago, we had a big influx of people from Puerto Rico right after Hurricane Maria. And then over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of people coming over from Venezuela, from Colombia, different parts of South America, Central America, Mexico, all the Caribbean. It's just, it's a beautiful melting pot of
Yes.
Spanish-speaking people that love the Lord, love their language, love their culture, love their food.
Yeah.
So we've been just blessed to be a blessing to that community.
Amen.
Amazing.
And Lécio, I've kind of teased you that you're the Ellis Island of Brazilians who moved to Orlando, because people will move to Orlando and somehow they find Family Church and they found you. Talk about we're recording this on a Monday. What happened last night as far as guests showing up?
Last night we had about 15 new families to
Just
visit.
1 week, not 15 people.
No,
15
families. And
who showed up in 1 week.
10 of these families is just arrived from Brazil to the United States.
Yeah,
and
that's
And
awesome.
talking about the multicultural, in our Brazilian congregation, the majority is Brazilian, but we have a Greek, a couple from Greece,
Yes.
and they have a couple from Haiti
Oh.
inside our service.
And they speak Portuguese.
They speak English and Portuguese.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Well, look, for those who are listening today, here's what I want to say. First of all, for those who are members of Family Church, you'll better understand our model and the power of our model. And for those who may be leaders in other churches or even lay people in other churches, why you should consider seriously being a multicultural church. So I want to talk, first of all, pick your brains, first of all, about what you see as some of the positives. And then we're going to talk about some of the challenges that come with being a multicultural church. So let's start with you, Joel. What do you see as one positive to this model?
It's the team. The first positive I've got to mention is the structure of the team environment. As a pastor, one of the things that most pastors struggle with is just they're alone.
Yeah.
There's no one around them. They've got to make all the decisions. They got to come up with the sermon. They got to make all the house visits. They got to open up the church, close the church, clean up the church. Everything is up to them. It's all on their shoulders. And sometimes, like Felipe was saying, we got to play the instruments too.
Yeah.
And being a part of a multicultural church, all of a sudden you're surrounded by a team, by people that you can pick their brains, they pick your brains, you have conversations, you can lean on one another, and that alone is such a big deal. If you have a church right now that's only one language, one culture, adding a second or a third, would be a big help to that person in itself.
Yes. And again, I mentioned this is a Monday afternoon. This morning, we sat around the table with 7 or 8 of us crafting our sermons
That's right.
for the next several weeks.
Yes.
We do the same sermon series, but we put our own personality and knowing our congregations, we crafted a little bit to lead from the pulpit when we preach. But what for me has been so great, we have 3 people around the room with doctorates. We have others with just a pastor's son and other experiences. And so whenever we put a message together, we're able to hear from multiple voices. We have one guy in there who hadn't turned 30 yet. We've got another person in their mid-30s. And then I'm the old guy in the room. I don't know, Coop may be older, but I'm one of the older guys in the room. And so it really has made the messages much better.
Absolutely.
Being able to collaborate on
Yes.
that and do those messages. So, Lécio, what do you see as one of the positives of this model?
This aspect you mentioned about the building the sermon together is a great positive aspect. Another one is the experience to a different environment, because it's a very special, because we have Brazilians and the Spanish and the American all the time in all meetings. We have the mindset, the culture. Each one to speak, you feel something different. It's a great experience for us.
We're reminded that heaven's going to be a little bit like that, right? When we get to heaven, it's not going to be an English service singing elevation music, okay? and it's going to be multicultural. And so let me just talk about both of yours a little bit real quick. First of all, our Brazilian community, I remember 8 years ago when you and I got together, and you came here basically to rent the chapel and to use that. And you had about 35 people.
Yes, Pastor.
And that started 8 years ago, and you were renting for a time, and we got together and said, hey, why don't we just become one? And I was amazed and humbled that you trusted us enough to come under that and to be a part of Family Church. And now, 8 years later, you're regularly running in the 300, 400, 500s on a weekend.
Yes.
And it would have been impossible probably to grow a church that quickly because there's so many resources you'd have to catch up on, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then, Joel, like I mentioned, what's amazing is our Spanish service really came out of Mark Goff, who is our worship leader, who doesn't speak Spanish.
No Spanish.
He thought, because he has a love for music, he thought what he did, he thought, let's put on a Saturday night Spanish worship service.
Once a month.
Once a month.
Yeah.
And of course, being Baptist, when you got a crowd, hey, let's get somebody to give a devotion, right?
That's right.
And then not long it became, somebody will do a sermon.
Right. Well, don't forget the offering either.
Oh, yeah, we got to take them an offering too, right? But then you had a core group of about 16 that got together, and we together said, you know what? Let's look like our neighborhoods, and let's start a Spanish congregation. And just yesterday, just Saturday, you had a women's conference with how many?
Well, we had a great women's conference with about 60 women.
60 women in just the women's conference.
Just the women.
So we're not talking the men, we're not talking. And so this last Easter, how many did you have?
We had over 400 people.
Over 400 people this last Easter. Do you know how many churches that have been in existence for 50 years would love to have 400 people, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the powers of the multicultural. Because, first of all, and I know this is going to be a controversy to some people, but I'm just going to say it. Somebody has to say it.
Somebody has to say it. Yeah, you're the winner.
When people hear family church, they think good things, they think healthy, right? The B sticker that's on everybody's cars, it's attractive. So you're already, and again, I'm going to say it, a positive product brand that you're a part of. Now, we know the church isn't a product or a brand. But people think that way, right? There are some churches, when you mention their name, people go, oh, that's the church that's always fighting, or that's the church that split 3 times, or that's the church that ran off their pastors, or that's the church that protests everything, right? I think we have a good reputation.
It adds credibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if somebody talks to their neighbor about family church, I think they think positive things about it, right? Yeah. A lot of it is because of people like him and Troy who are able to get things out there about our church, our social media presence.
We got to make sure everything is being filtered by specific standards, so we don't come across with some weird message. So we make sure the message is clear. I'm always aligning content with Chuck. So I really appreciate, Chuck, your time you take to revisit the things before we publish them, to make sure this is aligned with the church's vision, because thankfully, thank God, we have this great image, and we don't want to.
Well, a lot of that comes from authenticity, too. Yeah. It just comes across as it's who we are.
Yeah. Regularly, we see visitors and say, we go to my car in front of the church and they read Family Church. Yeah. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're going to talk now about some of the challenges. And I'll just throw this out here. One of the challenges is even though we have shared space and shared resources, which is a great
plus,
blessing, right? I mean, so let's face it, as a church, we have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of technology.
Yes.
And millions of dollars worth of buildings, right? So those shared resources are an incredible blessing, but they're also a challenge at times. So our Spanish community, tell them when you meet.
Well, we meet at the glorious hour of 1 p.m. on Sundays.
1 p.m. on Sundays, right?
That's right.
Which is not prime time for church.
It is not prime time. It kind of splits the day in half for people. But God is good, and people come and they stick around. And I remember starting when we were first getting started. I'd preach 30 minutes, just like everybody else, just like if I was preaching in English.
Right.
And then after the service, they're like, Pastor, but
Keep
where are we going?
Keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. So I start preach 45 minutes, and then, all right, everybody go home. And they wouldn't go home. They'd stay here, and they'd hang out after church, and the food and the camaraderie. It's just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, in fact, that became such an issue that on Saturdays, once a month, you do Sábado Familia.
That's exactly a good pronunciation,
Right?
too. Yeah,
Yeah,
Sábado
I'm learning.
Yeah, so once a month on a Saturday evening, we get together for 3-4 hours, starting at 6 o'clock in the evening.
Playing dominoes.
We play dominoes. We play a bunch of different types of games, and lots of food, some worship. But God is glorified. We build a community, and we're building up the church, and people are getting saved, and people are getting baptized. We do all of our baptisms on the Sábado de Familia, and we celebrate families.
And you're baptizing a ton
of people.
Families being baptized together.
Praise God.
And then, Pastor Lécio, it's still a challenge for Brazilians, but Brazilians love the nighttime.
Yes.
So tell them what times you meet and what campuses.
And we have it in 3 campuses. We have it in Lakeside, Windermere, and Four Corners. And the Lakeside and Four Corners at 11 o'clock.
And totally full. Really
Totally
need
full.
2 services on both of those.
We had 9 to 5.
In a portable.
In
a
a
double
portable.
right?
Double portable. You remember it's a little portable. We enlarged it.
Yes.
And now it's
Yeah,
more
you've outgrown
place.
it. Yeah.
And the Windermere have it every Sunday 6:30 p.m. With the main service. After the service, we spend 1 hour and a half in the gym for fellowship time.
Yes. I knew it was a different culture whenever y'all did a prayer night and it began at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, yes.
This is different. In fact, you had me preaching at 9 o'clock last Saturday. That's bedtime for this boy, right?
And also here, we have it in the December 31st, we have a service starting 10 p.m. and finish at 12 a.m.
Yeah.
And we spend two hours in that dinner
That's
in
right.
the gym.
Yes,
That's
yes.
Brazilians.
He's a Brazilian.
Yeah. And so there are some challenges with
Yeah.
it, but the challenges are worth it,
They are.
right? I mean, even the way we communicate with each other, we're having to learn, right? Because what's interesting is like whenever we share information in English, we just want the information out there. But a Brazilian's going to ask you a bazillion questions about that information. And at first they thought, why? Don't you trust me? But for the Brazilian culture, it's if we don't ask questions, then that just shows we're not interested in it.
Yes.
And a question shows interest. So we're having to learn all of those dynamics.
Right.
And when we print things, right? We have to constantly think 3 cultures. We just did our B team celebration. So the banner had to say, thank you. It had to say,
Gracias.
gracias.
Obrigado.
Obrigado, right? So we had to put that on the banners. Another thing is when we were talking about doing sermons, sometimes we'll use an acrostic in the
That's
sermon.
right.
Guess what?
No acrostics.
In English, acrostic doesn't work in Spanish or
right.
Portuguese.
You have to create a new one to make sense to Brazilians.
And all. But y'all do such a great
And
time.
I think it's also important, Chuck, to point out that for all the leaders and pastors that are thinking about this, is that what you have brought to the table for us is the ability and really the challenge that this is not just a translation.
No.
Lécio and I are not just translating into our languages what English Family Church is all about. It's not a scripted or a manuscripted sermon that we're putting into our languages. It's a completely dynamic cultural experience. It's the same God, the same vision, the same guiding principles and mission statement, but it's in our culture.
And so your people worship in their heart language.
That's right.
You hear their sermon in the heart language. And I thought you were going here, but I need to make this distinction. We are not a church with a Spanish and Brazilian ministry. We're a church of English-speaking, Spanish-speaking,
totally different,
Portuguese, right?
That's right.
It's who we are.
Right.
Yes.
And there's a lot of churches who will have a Spanish translation you can put in your ear, or that's not multicultural. Or we will have one service that happens in a room over here. No, everything, you're a full, complete body
it's
within
the DNA
the body,
of our
right?
church.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, we're about out of time, but I do want to say to anybody listening that our culture is changing. And we need to change with the culture. And right now we're saying, well, in our mission field, we're primarily English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, and being in Orlando, a lot of Portuguese, a lot of Brazilian-speaking. Man, if we were to have a lot of Russians move in, we would look at that, right?
Absolutely.
So we want our church to reflect the community. Any questions you have or statements you have?
No,
Thoughts?
I believe this is a blessing to be part of the church, that we can share so much and walk together as one. It's beautiful. And we, as we always been aligning how we're going to grow, how this is going to be translated, how this will communicate better with the people that is surrounding our communities, and how we reach them through small groups. And those small groups are also multi-language small groups. So I think this is going to make a really great impact.
Yeah, and just hearing Felipe made me think, our website, right? You can click a button, it goes in Spanish, click another button, it goes in Portuguese. And I think that's so cool. All right, so it's time for me to do this. Somebody has to say it.
Somebody has to say it.
All right, so this is going to be a little international, okay? So I was in Brazil one time, and we ordered pizza.
Ah, come on. No.
And we got the pizza, and it was basically dough with ketchup. And
Pizza is
then they
fine.
put
That's not
cheese
pizza.
on it.
Knife and fork.
Knife and fork.
And it was ketchup on a pizza
my
with
God.
cheese melted on top. And it was from Pizza Hut. It was just terrible.
No.
And let me just say this. People overuse ketchup way too
That's
much.
Now
right.
listen.
Ketchup is nothing but sugar for the most part. Right? Look at it.
Colored
At least on the
sugar.
pizza.
So never put ketchup on eggs. Can we
Never.
No,
agree?
we agree. Okay.
Never put
Never
ketchup. Who puts
on
ketchup
eggs.
on eggs?
No.
Never put ketchup on a steak.
Terrible.
Okay.
That's-
chopped steak, yes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's
No.
like the worst.
No.
Because that's a hamburger. Hamburger is
okay.
chopped steak.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
But if it's a real piece of meat still
No.
stuck together,
Oh, my gosh.
right?
Oh, my
You
goodness.
don't put ketchup on it. And then the worst.
The
Chuck,
word.
you're having bad experience in
ketchup.
Copacabana, pizza.
Ketchup on rice.
No,
Who does that?
terrible.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Ketchup on rice. I can't
Yeah.
believe it. Well, hey, Felipe, send us home.
Oh, well, I'll just make sure that ketchup on pizza is fine. We love that. All right. Guys, thank you very much for joining us one more time here for one more episode. I can't wait to see you next time. If you see this as valuable for you, please make sure to subscribe our channel, like this podcast, share with your friends, with your church, everybody you know that will like this content, and we'll be glad to.
All right, let's all
some more
say
stuff.
goodbye.
Goodbye.
No.
You said say goodbye.
Yes, let me say, Brazilian is better because you have Americans and the Spanish together. Ciao.
Ciao.
Adios.
Goodbye. See you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.